Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, students. It's my honor to be speaking here today at the Harrow School. I have been a journalist for about more than a quarter of my life, and almost approaching 1/3 actually. When I was asked to come here to speak and give a keynote about this topic, the future we choose, I thought very hard about what to speak about. And I think, the best way to speak is to speak about what you know. So I choose this topic, choosing the story, my own reflection on my 16 years in journalism. And I will pivot a lot on my experience in covering our neighboring country, Myanmar, over the last decade or so. I think choice is very important, and I know that many young people in this room are probably thinking about choices in their life for the future, thinking about the big picture, where their career is going to be, where their life is going to be, and so on. But I think choices, even in the smaller scale, is also very important. And from my profession, seeing some situation and choosing how to report it is very essential. And in these days and age where, we are inundated by information through social media, through the way that the echo chamber works in our politics and so on, globally, domestic as well, I think it is very important to understand the choice we make in writing a story, in framing a story, and in consuming news stories. And I think this is where my talk's going to be about. Essentially, Myanmar is a country that I have covered for the last 15 years. And one of the first assignments that I went into Myanmar was because their country was starting to open up. And there were changes that were taking place. This is in the early 2000s. This is long before sort of the end of military rule and all that sort of stuff. And one of the key group that I encountered, I think in 2012 onwards, was the ethnic Rohingya people. The Rohingya are a Muslim minority who live in Western Rakhine State in Western Myanmar. They are not officially recognized under Myanmar law as an ethnic group. And so they were persecuted, they were pressured. And in 2012, their houses were basically burned down, they were driven from their homes, and they had to live in makeshift camps around Rakhine State. So I got to visit them then and learn a lot about them. I actually met one Rohingya guy whose name is Ali, who I remain in touch with, who spoke Thai because he used to come and work in Thailand. And from that year onwards, I think the roller coaster started after the communal violence that happened in 2012, where they were segregated from their Buddhist neighbors. Pressure were mounting on them. And by 2014, 2015, a lot of them were escaping to Southeast Asia through fishing boats, wooden boats that could not really make the long journey, but they did, and they tried. And I encountered them again in southern Thailand when that story broke. So I was part, witnessing and seeing how those things unfold. I think it's important when we see situations that are so desperate and very difficult circumstances that a lot of these people encountered, to understand and to, in some ways, not only sympathize, but really understand the context of their plight and then explain that to the world. I think that's one of the first choice, right, of any journalist that would cover those kind of events. But I think the other thing is about framing. Framing a story is very important. I think if I can change the slide, if it's possible. I'll come back to the trust principle. Let me go through the trust principle. This is sort of the basic sort of principle in journalism, right? If you go to journalism school, you will have these kind of principle that emphasizes that reporting should be independent, they should have integrity, have a sense of responsibility, and of course, continuation to adapt and innovate in the way we tell story. That's our profession. And in Reuters, in my company, this is called the Reuters trust principle. It's sort of the key foundation of how to be impartial. You as a journalist, you don't have to be neutral. You can have feelings, you can have ideas, you can have political leanings. It's okay. But in your reporting, it is important to have this trust principle. So that, I put that slide there just to show that, that's the basis of where I'm from in, this the current environment of news. So yeah, I mentioned the context, right? So the context, understanding the context of their plight. I think it is important to understand what drives the event that took place, why they were kicked out of their country, why they make the desperate journey through open ocean to suffer what they've suffered. And in essence, that's one of my job in choosing the story, is to write about those contexts. And those contexts is the way that we explain to the world sort of what had happened, the difficult circumstances with the lack of recognition in the country, the domestic dynamic between sort of the military and the government at the time. These are the things that drives those events. But the framing, I think the framing is also very important, because increasingly when I look at some of the facts and figures that are being used and reported in the current media landscape, and you look at, when you have mass migration, like what we've seen with the Rohingya in 2015 and later in 2017, now I think more than 700,000, almost 1 million in Bangladesh, and tens and tens of thousands attempting to flee in different areas, including back through Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia over the past decade. We've seen this trend. The framing is important because in today's world, we're seeing, a huge wave against migration, right? We're seeing a huge taboo, if you like, a lot of different kind of media looking at the issues of migration and refugee and said, look, they are a security threat. In Thailand, we had the same, and Thailand is no exception. In 2015, as I was recalling, during the mass migration by boat by the Rohingya, the military government at the time did say that these were security threats, right? General Prayut, at the time, the prime minister, even said during his election campaign in 2019 that one of his key success was to kick out the Rohingya. A lot of what the Thais were doing basically when the boat comes in is that they would push them back to sea and let them go to Malaysia or Indonesia. It's not our problem, it's their problem, right? But when I was on the ground in southern Thailand, talking to the people, the community, the Thai community, Buddhist, Muslim, otherwise, whatever religion, they all said we should bring them in. They actually said, local people there actually have empathy and said, look, these people need water, they need food. So I think that's another key understanding about the choice we make. We always have a choice not to believe what people in authority says, because sometimes it's more important than just about authority. Sometimes it's a matter of life and death, right? And I think the world is a much warmer place when you actually meet with people, when you actually try to understand the strife and understand what is going on, rather than let it be dominated by ideas, by the way that the media plays some issues out. So I think framing is important here. It's important to understand that why some people frame some situation, looking at refugee as a security threat, as a problem, looking at refugee as, this is a financial burden of a country, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, if you actually, go close to the problem, understanding the people behind it, the Rohingya and this example, and others, throughout this past few years, we have another military coup in Myanmar, and we have different sorts of refugee crossing into Thailand. And of course, in Thailand, there's also continuous sort of, a sort of, I guess, atmosphere of some sort of fear that these people will come in and be a burden to society and so on and so forth. But I think framing it away from that security threat to the idea that this is a humanitarian crisis, that there are a sense of shared community actually, because people are not the border doesn't mean that it's a real division, right? It's a lot of the time, a lot of the borders, when you go to these borders, it's an artificial division. And so I think it is important to understand the humanity behind some of these crises to better keep yourself informed. And I think it's a choice as a journalist from my profession to frame the situation based on facts, but also to frame it, as accurate as possible to dispel away this idea that there's a threat, there's a fear of security. And I think that sometimes we have to always be mindful of the consequences of our reporting. We have seen beyond the Rohingya crisis, we have seen how different situations in the world are reported every day. And we have seen how sometimes the flashlight, of the media, when it moves away from a certain issue, doesn't mean that those issues are necessarily solved, And as we go into the future, where the landscape is filled with information, it is easy to forget when the spotlight move away. It's easy to forget some of these problems that are still exist in the world. So, my job is to tell stories, report the news, but I hope that through those reporting, through those journalism, that somehow those people who have the power to change the world can do so. And I think in many ways, this is also part of that great theme of this talk, choice for the future. And we come to basically sort of the end of my talk here, basically. I think that right now in the world, whether it's in, the West or here or elsewhere, I think what we're seeing essentially is that the idea that the truth is really under siege, right? A lot of people are talking about various situations through different perspectives, and then, the way that the media landscape, we are partly at fault of that, works, that some of these issues have been put forward through opinion makers and through talking heads, people that would sort of imprint their ideas into a certain situation. And there's a huge inundation going on, where sometimes the way even I as a journalist see, some of the key issues, some of the key facts get skewed or forgotten, left behind. And I think it is important as a journalist that this is my job in this day and age. It's a part of the choice that I make, is to keep these facts above the noise, right? And I think that if we continue to base our decisions on, and also base our understanding of the world through consumption of facts and understanding the context and the framing of each stories, I think we can get through this age of mass information and somehow still retain the sense of truth. I don't have the final answer to this, because we've seen it in the world all the time, where sort of the truth gets skewed and so on. But I have high hopes that despite what's going on, that, you know, your generation, the younger generation, will go forward in the world, will be more understanding about, you know, the context, the framing, the way things develop, and really sort of, you know, empathize with fellow human beings and actually understanding what's going on beyond the noises, beyond what's going on, you know, beyond what is being written or posted on social media and so on. So yeah, so that's my reflection of the choice we make. I think at the basis of this issue is that we have to understand when things happen, how we make others understand it. That's essentially the basis of journalism, right? Through those ethics that I mentioned earlier. But basically, we have to be able to convey what had happened. You know, these are the people that were displaced. Why were they displaced? They were displaced because there were pressure on them that has been stirred up by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what is their future? Their future is up in the air, right? Because we have to understand the forces that are at work and what causes their problems. And I think through that, I think, you know, that's the way that we have to tell the story and the way that you know, people should consume or the story that for people to consume, so that they have a better understanding of what's going on in the world. So I think the bottom line is that in this day and age, I think sticking to those principles and sticking to those ideas is still remain the key part of what journalism is. I have no crystal ball for what would journalism be like in the future, but I think from my experience that it won't change that much, right? So with that, I guess I hope you enjoy the talk, and yeah, if you have any questions, you're welcome to actually reach out to me actually if you're interested in more issue about journalism. So thank you.